Welcome to the Gospel Coalition podcast, equipping the next generation of believers, pastors, and church leaders to shape life and ministry around the gospel. On today's episode, you'll hear a workshop on navigating ministry and marriage as a pastor's wife. This workshop was originally recorded at TGC's 2018 Women's Conference.
Here to my right is Lauren Hansen. She lives in Birmingham, Alabama. She is an elder's wife at Redeemer Community Church, and she and her husband Colin have been serving together in ministry for 14 years, and he's officially been an elder at the church for 2 years. Then next to her is Latoya McCutcheon from Memphis, Tennessee. She's been married for 18 years. She has a 17-year-old son. Her husband is a pastor at Fellowship Memphis Church, and they are also in the process of planting a church in Raleigh, North Carolina. And they have served in ministry together for about 13 years. And then to Latoya's right is Noël Piper. She is the mother of 5, the grandmother of 13, and the wife of 1. She says that through the years, she has seen her family as her primary calling. From 1980 to 2012, she supported her husband in his ministry as pastor of Bethlehem Baptist Church in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now he works full-time for Desiring God Ministries. And since adopting her youngest child in 1995, her life and her interests have been drawn into the issues of adoption and racial harmony. And she additionally volunteers in the various ministries of Johnny and Friends. So it's a privilege for me to be here to learn from these women. And I know that their wisdom and their experience that the Lord has given them, the grace the Lord has poured out on them, will be a benefit to us all. So I like to begin just by asking you, sisters, what are some of the unique blessings of a ministry marriage? You know, what are some things about being married to a man and sharing in ministry that have been particular unique blessings for you?
Well, I think of things in little pieces. So one piece is that it has been a really great blessing to us that each of our children has had at least one young person, but older than they are, who has been a mentor during some of their teen years that we might not have had as the kind of friendship or access to otherwise.
I would say that we've had the opportunity to have people who are sharing the same faith with us, who are in the trenches with us, to hold us accountable for how we treat each other and how we manage our home and how we love on each other and our kids. And so I think that's been a great asset for us.
Do you feel like that's people in your church that have done that for you, or other ministry leaders? Or
I think that in my church, and as we've developed in our relationship, just having people who are like-minded come alongside us and actually hold us accountable, whether they are members of our church or outside the church. Just being able to be in a body of believers has been great.
I'd say the greatest blessing we've seen from having a ministry marriage is being able to evangelize, witness, disciple, and care for people together as a couple. Because we've had the opportunity to host home groups, small groups you might call them, and to meet with individuals, married couples, families, people who know the Lord, people who don't know the Lord. We've seen people come to faith in serving together and being used by the Lord to help point them to the gospel. So getting to see new life created because of work that the Lord's done through us together as a married couple has been such a gift, really, to care for those people, to pray for those people, to watch and see that fruit multiply, that they go then and do that to others. It's so rewarding to be of use together as a family.
That's great. So I think when we're in ministry, with our husbands, in church ministry in particular, our lives are very much structured around the 1 in 7, right? We have this one day of worship and God's people, and that's sort of, if you're a pastor's wife, then that's like the main work day of your week. Not that everybody thinks your husband only works one day a week, but we all know he doesn't work more. In that the Lord's Day coming together, and then you have these other days, and every week this pattern is repeated, and so it's very cyclical and goes on week after week through the year. What are some habits, sort of daily habits or weekly habits? What are some things that repeat in your marriage, in your life, that have been particularly helpful to you? Sort of the little, not the major mountaintop experiences, but just sort of the repeating habits that you developed in your marriage that have been helpful.
I will speak about when our kids were still at home, but that would be devotions together in the evening, and shaped by what age they were. Always something from the Bible, but then maybe Bible story books or other things if they were very young. And then my husband and I praying together regularly, if we were going to bed at the same time. And so those family devotional habits were very important.
Tell me about praying together with your husband. Do you pray? Do you have certain things you pray for? Do you have, what does that look like?
Now we pray for sure for the missionaries on our church's prayer calendar that are up for that week. And then just generally whatever we think of for what's going on in the world, for things that are happening with our kids. No specific plan. There was a time when we would have maybe twice a year what we call missions in the manse. So anybody who thought they might possibly be interested sometime in missions to come to our house, and we'd have some kind of worship together and something about missions, and have them write their name down so people could follow up with them for the missionary nurture program if they wished. And we would pray through those names. What that meant was naming them and then praying a prayer that would cover all of them unless we knew something specific. So that was one additional kind of thing we did.
I think for us, we've learned to, in addition to praying together each morning, we've learned to have daily check-ins. And so one thing that my husband and I have to do, because we both work outside the home, is, what was your God moment for the day, or how did you see God manifest himself in your day, or what was your deepest thought? And so we've learned to kind of decompose our day outside of our bedroom, right? Outside of our bedroom, simply because we don't never know how those conversations are going to expand. Sometimes some conversations you don't want to take into your love zone. And so I have to, maybe we start in the kitchen, where there's food. And so just learning to give him the space to check in and kind of decompress from our day, because outside of the house, I never know what my husband or myself have to encounter.
Yeah, those are great. We echo those family devotionals. We have young kids, so we read a Bible story and sing a hymn and do a memory verse and pray every night before bed. And also we at dinner with our little kids ask, how did you see God at work today? And we all talk about how we saw God at work that day. With my son, usually he's 3, it's going to the zoo or whatever neat thing he got to do that day. But then we talk about how God was at work through that thing. So absolutely echo those. One other thing that we found really helpful, a habit, is just going on walks. And also our pastor and his wife go on a walk every single day. Like Megan said, my husband's an elder. He does work for the Gospel Coalition though, so he's also in ministry. But regardless, going on walks we've just found to be a very helpful way for us to have time to make sure that we're talking, because it can be very easy to go about all the things to do in a day and realize you didn't actually hear how your husband's doing, and you didn't get to hear how you're doing. So we like that.
So I think one of the blessings of being in a ministry marriage is that you're very connected in some ways to what it is that your husband is doing. My dad is a pastor and my husband is a pastor, and I sometimes say, I don't know what I would do if my husband were a rocket scientist and he went off every day and I had no idea what he was doing, But we basically, when your husband is an elder, when your husband is a pastor, you understand the thing, the people he works with, the people he's serving, the tasks that he's doing, you're even participating sometimes in those tasks. What are some ministry tasks that you've been able to do alongside your husband that have given you particular joy or that have been a particular privilege for you? And we don't have to go in the same order. Not everyone has to answer every time. I'm a Presbyterian, so I really appreciate that, but...
My husband and I do a lot of marriage counseling together. I have a background in counseling, and so I found that to be one of my greatest joys, to be able to walk newly married or even potential, individuals that are wanting to get married through what a healthy marriage could possibly look like, and debunk some of the expectations that they sometimes have, and just straight up and tell them, hey, this is really going to be hard. This is the hardest thing you're going to ever have to do, Let's get that out first, so that they can, prosper healthily in their marriage. And so that's something that my husband and I have both enjoyed doing, seeing marriages come to fruition and individuals love each other.
Do you have like a plan, so you have a couple, they're coming Friday night for their counseling, whatever. Do you two talk ahead of time? We're going to talk about this, or is it just sort of more organic conversation, or how do you organize that?
Well, initially, we will have them to complete certain assessments that we generally will use. For example, one assessment is called it's through Gospel Pathways. It's called the Enneagram. And what the Enneagram allows them to do is to see how they're wired, because we're all wired differently. And that's not a sinful thing, although at times we can act in a certain way that may be sinful. And also because we bring certain attributes into our marriage from our backgrounds. And so it's always good for us to start there and to also figure out, what do you expect from your marriage? And give them language that they can use to communicate with each other so that they can have a better understanding of what they are wanting or what they expect out of their marriage. And so those are some of the tools that we utilize.
How about either of you? Are there ministry tasks you enjoy doing together?
Probably the main thing we do together is when we have people at our house and are in conversation together in whatever direction that takes, and that depends on who the people are.
So obviously there are sacrifices associated with being in ministry. Just name just a few of the sacrifices that you think come along with being in ministry.
I think the hardest thing is just seeing the brokenness of humanity and kind of getting a look behind the curtain of what's going on at church or what's going on in a parachurch organization. It's sometimes I just desired to have that wonderful naivete that these are all just such warm, sunny, godly people, and we're all just doing great. And while we are godly, we are sinners and saints at the same time, and we are struggling and mourning, and sometimes that depravity can just feel overwhelming, and sometimes I wish I didn't know what I know, and sometimes it's hard to find that balance between how I can help share my husband's burdens and then what overwhelms me, because I can really struggle with wanting to control things that I can't, or having anxiety for bearing burdens that I should give over to the Lord, but I have trouble doing that. So it's hard to feel that weight. That's what I'd say.
I would say time is always something that you have to give up. And I think that early on, my struggle was making sure that I helped my husband balance his time. So I became his stopwatch. And making certain that the time that we do take away from the home that is replenished by God's word or some creative way of spending time with each other and our kids, just to make sure that nothing is left undone. Sometimes that means he has to wash clothes and I'm not. Or, chores are done that he would normally do and I have to pick up the slack. And so I think time is one of the most valuable things that we have to sometimes let go of in order to complete God's will.
And to extend from that, it means that since time is tight, that you schedule things that might seem more spontaneous in other families. And, like time to play with the kids in the evening, for instance. And that lack of spontaneity can kind of wear on the kids over time as they think about it, I think.
So then to follow up on that, these sacrifices that we make, whether they are time or emotional energy or just bearing the daily burdens of God's people, how have you found, meditating on Christ and knowing Christ to be helpful to you? Then as you're making these sacrifices, obviously Christ, the one who sacrificed for us, are there particular ways that Christ has become sweeter to you in ministry because of that?
I think in a lot of ways, having a daily devotion kind of sets the tone for my day. I noticed that to some people, they have to wake up with coffee. I have to wake up with some type of devotion, or I will be cuckoo throughout the rest of my day. I know that my husband, at times, he has to get his devotion on the other side of our walls at his office. But for me, I have to find that space to collect my thoughts so that I'll know how to approach my day. I think that's been really helpful for me.
Are there particular passages or particular, things that you've studied that have been particularly helpful to you?
Yes. Oh, yes. So early on, I did a devotion on Proverbs 31, 10 through 31, and a wise woman offered that devotion up to me when I first got married. And it was tremendously beneficial to me because it gave me a paradigm for what a virtuous woman really looked like. Although my mother was a great, God-fearing woman, their marriage wasn't one, my parents' marriage wasn't one that I wanted to emulate. And so seeing that and walking through what specifically does a virtuous woman look like and what that woman could potentially be for me helped me to get through my first years of marriage, which were for me very tough. Because I walked in with, again, my own expectations of what I thought that would look like.
So how has Christ's sacrifice become even more precious and real? I think I've learned the limitations of my own importance, that I'm just not that important compared to God's grand plans and his ability to do things that I can't even ask. Well, I can't ask and imagine, but he asks us to do that. But things are beyond my ability, and that he's just so much bigger and has such a greater desire to see his church flourish, and that I feel smaller than I used to in a good way. So I guess I'd say it's humbling. It's humbling to be of use, and it just gets richer as time goes on.
I think it's not possible to underestimate how important it is having just the rock under you, the certainty of who God is and how he works, and that he does only good for his children even when it's hard, so that even when I'm not consciously thinking about God, that is where I'm standing.
So I think sometimes, because there are sacrifices in ministry marriage, we can fall into the trap of thinking that the church or the ministry is the enemy, that it's sort of either the church or our family, or it's either the church or me, or, somehow that the church is against me, or it's the other thing. And are there ways that you can point to that the church has actually been a great blessing to you, that you are that you're a better wife or a better mother, or for having the church, that the church has actually been your best friend in ministry marriage?
I love the men and women who have worked with our kids through their different ages and times that people would probably really rather not have been working with one or another of them. and I'm sure I heard only a fraction of what some of those things were. Some of them come back as stories still, and my children are in their 30s and 40s now. But that is a huge thing, to have people that we trust to be telling our children the truth and to living it out for them.
I think that's so true, especially, if you're in a situation, like I'm in a situation where my husband does virtually all of the preaching, and then we do family devotions in the home, which my husband or I lead, depending on who's home that night. And so my children's instruction is coming almost entirely from one or other of their parents. And so I think what Noelle is saying is so important, because the church then provides you with all these other people who are saying, your soul is important and Christ is the best thing out there, and bearing testimony to the thing that they're hearing from us, which is good, but they're saying, you know what, we also are invested in this. So are there other ways that the church has been a great blessing?
Do we have a lot of elders' wives in here? Or are we mostly Pat? Okay, good. Okay, because it's different. I think the answer to this question is a little bit different.
Yeah, that's why you're on this panel, so that we can have. Yeah, there we go.
It's interesting that it comes to mind that pastors being a position of such respect and honor and importance, being behind the pulpit, I'd imagine that the congregation just sees them a little bit differently, both in ways that are challenging and ways that are very good and supportive. Elders really being behind the scenes, I think can not be that first, like, top of mind church care recipients, because they're doing so much that isn't seen. And so thankfully, I think our elders are very much aware of each other and what families need on that almost horizontal level of leadership. Because I don't even know that a lot of our totality of our congregation knows who the elders are and knows who, like, there's a family, they might need some particular support and love from our church because of how much they give in time and energy and things. So I'm thankful that I've seen us take care of each other and be aware that, if you have like a sort of a tree of care and leadership, it's thin at the top, and to look around and remember the others who are up there with you, putting shade over those lower branches might need a little covering sometimes too. So,
can you give like one or two practical examples of how elders' families can care for each other?
Yeah. I think a lot of just asking, assuming too that we're under some spiritual attack, and assuming that it's not, life's going to be hard and there are going to be seasons of particular hardship, and really just asking those real questions and being vulnerable, asking to be led in, sharing needs and sharing burdens, and then trusting that people want to be there to meet them. So but we've had adoptions that have fallen through bizarre major illnesses, like just a lot of hardship that we just communicate and try to meet needs in practical ways, meals, prayers, fundraisers, those sorts of things. Yeah.
I think that the assumption is so I'm a pastor's wife, but because the pastor is usually the one that's up there, that's leading, that's caring, that's shepherding the body, that there aren't situations that may arise within his household. And so it's been great to have members of the church come and say, hey, let us pray for you, or let us take you out to dinner, or, and I think that's what church is supposed to look like. It's not just the pastor that's providing shepherding to the flock. It's also that reciprocation that takes place, because we're all God's church. And so there needs to be a level of reciprocation.
So what can you, each of you, maybe talk about sort of one challenge, without naming names, but one challenge in ministry life that you've worked through as a couple, that has been something that you've experienced, and just tell a little practically kind of how did you work through that?
One of the most stressful times for us was when two of our staff members were involved in a situation where that they needed to be released, and that caused a lot of disagreement and uncertainty in the whole congregation, and disagreement about how it should be handled. And there were many, many late meetings until late in the night with the elders trying to sort things out. And I was really surprised at that time that my husband away from home for hours on end, way more and way later than usual, and yet I felt more connected with him in ministry during those days. I wasn't directly involved with any of the conversations that were going on, but there was just a sense of really being together in ministry here at this, fortunately only a one-time period in the church. And I think that was a real sweet thing that God did that was totally unexpected. I'll just tell you something funny. He's at one of those nights he was out past midnight or whatever. The kids and I came home from somewhere 10 or so at night and discovered a bat in the kitchen. And I had to call one of my neighbors, pull up the badminton racket from the basement and call one of our neighbors who really didn't want to come over, but he did anyway. And so even our neighbors were helping us out in that time.
I think for us, just walking with newly married families that may be experiencing loss of a child, or just issues within their marriage. And my husband and I have had to sometimes disagree on how to proceed in reference to assisting in those situations. But I think that with us trying to figure out what would be the right direction to go in, I think it's helped us to kind of look at ourselves and our marriage as well. And so in that we were providing assistance, we learned how to better communicate with one another through some of the issues that we've faced with other couples. And so I think that that's been helpful to us.
I think our biggest challenge is just that my husband and I have very, very different personalities. You mentioned the Enneagram. I'm a 2 and he's an 8. You're an 8. Yeah. Yeah. So it's just so I don't know if y'all know. That basically means I'm the giver, like the all heart, all relationship helper. And he's what's 8? The challenger. Yeah. The challenger. Yes. Yeah. So you talk about having different perspectives. Sometimes we just have very different perspectives, and I think over time have learned to pray more and more, and to trust that the Lord is good and that He's working and leading. He's speaking to both of us, but also I've learned that my husband has information and knowledge of particular situations that I don't have because I'm not in that role, and sometimes it can be tempting just to overstep, or because he thinks so differently from me, just assign steps that he wants to take or whatever. It's just like, oh, that's his personality and that's his part that I don't understand and I don't like. Just to be more patient, to be more prayerful, to be more sympathetic, and to know that my way isn't the right way. Like, there are gifts and all the things all the ways that God's made us and given us to see Him, and He's at work. So
So I have one more question, and then we'll open it up if some of you have questions. But so we talk a lot about ministry life being a fishbowl, maybe more so for a pastor who's up front and less so for elders. But I think elders' wives definitely face this too. And people are looking at you and they're watching your family life. What is one thing that you hope that your church, that the people who are watching will learn from watching you, learn about marriage, learn about family, ultimately learn about Christ and his church, right? Because marriage is a picture of Christ and his church. When they watch you, what do you want the people in your church to take away or to learn? And of course, you're not going to do it perfectly, but this is our hope, by grace, that they might learn something.
So I would say my husband and I early on wanted to make sure that we had like a mission for our marriage. I've always felt that my greatest ministry was my household, my marriage. And I think over the years we've developed the concept that we want our marriage to tell the truth about who Christ is to whomever is looking, whether it's our son or our neighbor's kids or our neighbors. We want our marriage to reveal to everyone who Christ truly is. And I think that in doing that, in trying to emulate what God's love for the church, the body of Christ is it's gonna show up in how we treat each other. Now, do we get it right all the time? No. But other people need to see that too, right? They need to see the imperfections that we have and also be able to witness how we come on the other side of that. And so for us, that's huge, right? Because in marriage, sometimes there's this perception that it's supposed to be perfect. I'm supposed to have this honeymoon that lasts forever. And we all know that doesn't take place. And so, especially with younger couples, I think walking alongside some of those individuals to let them see, hey, yes, you fight, right? You're going to have battles that arise in your marriage, but coming through that is really going to speak volumes to who Christ is in your marriage.
A long time ago, I had a T-shirt that had lines and lines and lines of names of Jesus. And I was checking out of the store, and when I was leaving, the cashier said, "Oh, I like your shirt." And then I remembered what I had on, and I thought, "Oh man, I wonder what I said and if I did everything okay." But that's what I want, is that when people see us and catch us in any moment, that we're consistent in being honest, in reflecting Jesus well in the way we do everything.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Gospel Coalition podcast. Check out more gospel-centered resources at thegospelcoalition.org.